Lecture 10, Becoming Self-Regulated Learners. Have you ever found yourself staring at your phone or laptop, mindlessly scrolling through social media or watching videos when you're supposed to be studying? Have you ever shown up to a meeting and immediately regretted that you didn't spend more time preparing? Have you ever found yourself anxiously rushing to finish a project right up until the deadline, even though you had planned on completing it much earlier? If so, consider yourself human. Almost everybody struggles sometimes to stay engaged and on task, especially with all the digital distractions that surround us these days. Maybe we start a learning project with great expectations and intentions, only to find ourselves struggling later on to live up to them or having abandoned them altogether. Sometimes it's not our fault. We get sick, our kids need more of our time, work schedules change. There are many legitimate reasons for changing plans, delaying plans, or abandoning plans altogether. And we all have to learn how to prioritize and to adapt to the circumstances in which we find ourselves. But sometimes we struggle with knowing how to prioritize or how to set reasonable goals in the first place. Maybe you're one of those super ambitious people who's guilty of always trying to take on more than you can handle and spreading yourself too thin. On the other hand, maybe you know someone who doesn't seem to have any goals or ambition, or who seems to actively avoid making commitments. Neither approach is very productive. Still other times, our goals and priorities might be perfectly clear and reasonable, but we might find ourselves struggling to get started or simply following through with them. Sometimes the path to achieving our goals is unclear, or we don't yet have the requisite skills or knowledge to proceed. And other times, we may be perfectly capable of proceeding, but we engage in self-sabotage by needlessly delaying action or procrastinating. All of these examples illustrate problems with self-regulation, which is paramount for success in school, the workplace, and life in general. We can't always rely on others to motivate us to do our work or to learn and grow. Nor is it in our best interest to wait for others to tell us when we've succeeded or failed. Self-regulated learning involves being proactive about directing our own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, including continuously monitoring our progress toward our goals, checking outcomes, reflecting on our strategies, and adapting our efforts as needed. People who are good self-regulators know themselves well and use this knowledge to increase their chances of success. They not only set realistic goals and make plans for how to achieve them, but they can also identify and anticipate mental traps and behavioral patterns that might thwart their success. And they devise ways to prevent or get around those obstacles. They know how to learn from past experience and are willing to make changes. Of course, people differ in their levels of self-regulation. But no matter who you are, self-regulation skills can be learned and improved. Like muscle, self-regulation skills get stronger with increased use and deliberate practice. And, as with strength training, there are some specific techniques that you can employ to get better results. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a few of those techniques. I'm going to give you concrete suggestions for being a more effective, self-regulated learner. Consistent with one of the leading theories in this area, proposed by researcher Barry Zimmerman, we will explore things you can do at 3 phases of the learning process: the forethought, or planning phase, the performance, or doing phase, and the reflection phase. Let's start with forethought, which involves 2 important components: goal setting and implementation intentions. In learning, one mistake people often make is diving right in and sort of swimming with the current without ever considering why they jumped into the river in the first place. Being spontaneous can be fun and exciting and can boost our well-being, but too much spontaneity can leave us driftless. And there's no guarantee that it will lead to desired outcomes. As the Cheshire Cat told Alice, you're sure to get somewhere if you walk long enough. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Setting goals is an important strategy used by successful learners. Goals provide structure, enable us to focus on what's important, boost our motivation, and allow us to see when we've made progress. But not all goals are equal. Anyone can set a goal, but there's a big difference between setting goals and actually accomplishing them. Consider that less than 10% of New Year's resolutions are ever met, and 25% are abandoned within the first week. Just because you state a goal doesn't mean it will happen, or even that it's likely to happen. In order for goals to help performance and actually lead to success, they need to have certain characteristics. Specifically, research shows that there are 5 critical properties of goals to consider: congruence, specificity, measurability, difficulty, and timing. Congruent goals are those that are accompanied by a sense of personal ownership. As much as possible, you should consciously consider your overarching goals for whatever learning activities you're engaging in. Why are you here? What do you want to gain from this experience? What personal skills or outcomes are you hoping to obtain? You might have to take a certain class to fulfill degree requirements, or you might have to complete a research project to pass a class. But instead of just going through the motions, pause to consider how that class or how that project might be useful or important, or how the content might provide some insight into better understanding yourself, or how you might apply that knowledge to be a more effective employee, boss, coach, or even parent. In other words, how might completing the class or project actually benefit you, personally or professionally? The more you can personalize the experience and connect it to your own values and interests, or to other goals you have, the more likely you'll stick with it and stay motivated. It's easy to lose motivation if you feel like you're only doing something because you have to, or merely to appease someone else. No one likes to feel controlled, like a pawn. We all have an inherent need to be self-driven, or to feel like we have at least some degree of choice and control over our thoughts and behaviors. So if you can find a way to make educational objectives and assignments personal, you'll be more likely to be focused and engaged, to persevere, and to derive satisfaction from the experience. The next key goal characteristic is specificity. In order to be effective, goals should be well-defined, with clear standards for what counts as success. Vague goals like get good grades or try your best aren't particularly helpful because they have ambiguous meanings and don't provide clear criteria to gauge your progress. What counts as a good grade? And how do you know when you're trying your best? Specific goals tell you exactly where to focus and precisely what to do. This also means goals need to be concrete and measurable. For instance, if you want to improve your academic performance, it might be helpful to set a numeric goal, such as an assignment average or a cumulative GPA. But you should also identify some specific changes in your behaviors that will likely produce those results, such as studying at least 20 minutes each day or completing all of the assigned readings. In sum, specific goals include not only clearly desired outcomes, but also clear markers for how you will measure your progress. One word of caution: be careful to set goals that you actually have some control over, or at least be aware of the limits of your control. For example, setting a goal of receiving an A, or say 95% on an assignment, may or may not be attainable given your current ability level, support resources, and grading standards. Just as winning a sporting event may be impacted by bad weather, injury, or other external factors. You're more likely to maintain motivation and to derive satisfaction if you center your goals around your own efforts and personal progress. A closely related consideration of effective goal setting is difficulty level, or how challenging the goal is to you. It's important to set goals at a moderate level of difficulty. I like to call it the Goldilocks consideration. Goals should be challenging, but attainable. Not too easy, not too hard. Setting goals that can be achieved with little or no effort will make it harder to stay motivated and engaged, can limit learning, and can ultimately prevent you from reaching your potential. You'll get bored, or you'll waste your time. Maybe both. On the other hand, setting goals that are too difficult or overly ambitious can be overwhelming, frustrating, and demotivating. Your goals should be realistic and appropriate to your present capabilities and behaviors. You can't go from couch potato to world-class athlete overnight, just like you're unlikely to go from a D average to being an A-plus student in one semester. There's no set formula for setting optimally challenging goals, but whatever you're measuring, you should consider your baseline data. For example, what is my current GPA? And then set the bar from there. In general, I'd say it's better to err on the side of making your goals too challenging rather than too easy. As the saying goes, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. But you should also be willing to readjust as needed. If you're having trouble sticking to your goal after just a couple days and feeling discouraged, then consider lowering the bar and starting with something easier. If you find that you're meeting your goals with little effort, then consider raising the bar. The last consideration of effective goals is timing. In addition to setting specific goals with clear assessment markers, you should also set a time interval for achieving your goals. But when to start and how much time is enough? Those answers really depend on the size and scope of your goal, and there are benefits to setting a combination of short-term and long-term goals. Long-term goals are beneficial because they give us purpose, provide something major to strive towards, and help us coordinate our decisions and behaviors. But short-term goals help us stay focused and energized along the way. They can serve as stepping stones toward our long-term goals, and achieving them provides small boosts to our motivation and commitment. Short-term goals also provide opportunities for useful feedback and serve as benchmarks or progress checkpoints toward our longer-term goals. You can visualize your goals as being organized in a sort of staircase, with your biggest and most long-term goals at the top, and smaller and more intermediate goals making up each step. For example, I might have the long-term goal of becoming a doctor, but before I can do that, I need to graduate from medical school. And before I can do that, I need to earn my undergraduate degree. And before I can do that, I need to pass my organic chemistry class, which requires that I pass this next exam, and so on. The same principle applies on a smaller scale as well. For instance, if you have a major project due in some class at the end of the term, you may set multiple intermediate deadlines for brainstorming topics, researching sources, drafting each section of the paper, finalizing your paper, and developing a presentation. On its own, the entire project might feel daunting or even insurmountable, but breaking it down into a series of parts makes it feel more manageable and can also help ensure you stay on track. Now, at this point, you may be thinking that effective goal setting is much more complicated than you realized. If you're worried you won't remember everything I've said so far, here's a helpful acronym to help. SMART. SMART. Effective goals are SMART, meaning they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. When people fail to achieve their goals, sometimes the problem is with how they set them up in the first place, but other times it's an issue of follow-through. In addition to setting SMART goals, it's equally important that you make concrete plans for how, when, and where you will work towards them, which should include planning how you will accomplish your goal in the face of distractions, obstacles, and interruptions. Because let's be honest, stuff happens. Life gets in the way, our schedules change, and it's all too easy to fall back on old habits. Sticking with your learning goals is sometimes hard. Many of us know that, but we don't often plan for those challenges. Instead, we tend to be overly optimistic. We plan for the best case scenario. And while it's easier, and it makes us feel good to imagine the best possible outcomes, we need to plan for potential roadblocks as well. The more we can anticipate challenges, the more we can do to prevent them, or at least make a plan for overcoming them, as opposed to being caught off guard. When we're unprepared for challenges, it's easy to be overwhelmed in the moment by anxiety, frustration, and other negative emotions. How many of you have ever failed a test and thought to yourself, well, that's it, no point in trying now, might as well quit? Not only can unanticipated failures and setbacks like this dampen our motivation, but negative emotions also impair our ability to engage in the necessary creative and critical thinking to overcome those setbacks. If you set an intention for how you would like to handle challenges, you can purposefully respond instead of merely reacting to them. For example, let's say you're taking a course for credit. You've already considered the characteristics of effective goals, and based on that, you've set a major goal to get an A on the next exam. Let's say you've set some intermediate goals to attend all the classes, complete all the homework assignments, and study for at least 30 minutes, 4 days a week. Now, you can't plan for every possible problem or interruption that could occur, but you can use your understanding of yourself to plan for the most likely potential roadblocks. For example, if you struggle getting up in the morning and making it to that early class, then maybe you ensure that you go to bed by 11 p.m. the night before. Or maybe you set multiple alarms. Maybe you program the coffee maker to start brewing before your alarm goes off so that the smell entices you to get out of bed. Maybe you enlist the help of a classmate to pick you up for class in the morning. Maybe you do all of these things and hope that just one of them works. If you have an unpredictable work schedule that could interfere with your study plans, Maybe you make a point of choosing study times that are least likely to be impacted. Or maybe you schedule extra study time to account for those possible disruptions. If you're a parent of young kids, well, good luck to you. I haven't quite figured out how to plan for all of those contingencies, but at least I'm not entirely surprised when they happen. And I do have emergency babysitter phone numbers readily available. So we're basically talking about contingency planning here. Yes, you want to get organized, identify your goals, and create solid plans for achieving them, but you also want to have some backup plans in case things don't go exactly as you wanted. This enables you to stay on track no matter what comes your way, and in doing so, to hold yourself accountable to your goals. So up to this point, we focused on the planning phase of self-regulated learning. Let's turn now to the second phase, which is the actual doing and monitoring phase. You might be great at setting goals and making plans, but it's just as important that you actually follow through with them. Knowing what to do and actually doing it are two very different things. For instance, how many of you struggle with procrastination, where you pretty much know what you need to do and how to do it, but keep delaying or otherwise putting it off, even despite the threat of negative consequences? Procrastination can affect all areas of our lives, and pretty much everyone is guilty of procrastinating on something. There are many different reasons why we procrastinate, but whatever the reason, sometimes getting started is the hardest part of any learning task. So here are two of the best strategies for overcoming procrastination. Number 1, start small. And number 2, start now. Don't wait for that perfect moment of inspiration, which may never come. A few moments ago, I described how having a series of smaller, short-term goals can be useful in helping you reach the bigger, long-term goals. The same idea applies here when it comes to initiative. Smaller goals are inherently less daunting and can help us overcome that initial hurdle of getting started. So if that's where you're stuck, take a look at your to-do list and identify some of the smaller, less time-consuming, or less mentally demanding tasks to begin. For example, maybe you're in a professional development module that requires you to create and deliver a PowerPoint presentation, and maybe the very thought of it overwhelms you. Well, in that case, you might just start by drafting an outline. It doesn't even have to be a formal outline. Just take some time to jot down your ideas or make a list of bullet points you want to cover. Doesn't have to be perfect, pretty, or by any means final, but anything that helps you make progress should be considered a win. Alternatively, if you've already worked through the smaller components and find yourself procrastinating on a larger or more demanding part of the task, then set a timer. This is what I like to call the 10-minute rule. Just set aside 10 minutes and start chiseling away at the daunting task. For most of us, 10 minutes is not a huge commitment. No matter how unmotivated you're feeling or how challenging the task, most of us can withstand 10 minutes. And knowing that there's a clear endpoint in sight is often enough to get us to commit. With either approach, the idea is to make it as easy as possible to get started, and then hope that momentum will help carry you further into the task. Remember the law of inertia. Objects at rest stay at rest, but objects in motion tend to stay in motion. The thing for procrastinators to keep in mind is this: small action is still action. Small progress is still progress. And you might be surprised by how much work you can accomplish in smaller spurts and bits. For example, you can write an entire novel in 30 days if you commit to writing just 1,600 words a day. And every year, thousands of people participate in National Novel Writing Month to do just that. With that being said, persistence and sticking with your goals can be hard. Maybe you're the kind of person who quickly gets excited and motivated to start something new, but then find yourself losing that energy and enthusiasm just as quickly. Or maybe you're the kind of person who starts all sorts of projects but rarely sees them to fruition. If so, here are 5 tips that can help you stay on track. First, set clear, concrete, and intermediate goals. This overlaps with our earlier discussion, but bears repeating. You want to make it as easy as possible to both see and monitor your progress. Divide your learning goal into a series of smaller goals and then create to-do lists. Use a planner and set reminders. Check in with yourself regularly. Keep track of what strategies seem to be working for you and which ones aren't. Take notes on this. Don't just try to keep it all in your head because it's easy to forget the details. And patterns are sometimes easier to see if they are concretely, visually represented. Not to mention that seeing concrete reminders of your goals and your progress feels good and can inspire further motivation. Second, As much as possible, develop a consistent work schedule. Having a routine may sound boring, but it helps save you time and energy by reducing the number of decisions you have to make. It also helps to ensure that you actually engage in your learning activity as opposed to putting it off or replacing it with other activities. Behavioral and mental habits provide us with momentum, and consistency makes it easier for our mind and body to adapt throughout the day. Even keeping a consistent sleep schedule can help to boost your mental sharpness, energy level, and performance. And here's a third tip that will help you stick with your goals. Stay flexible. I know this seems to contradict the second tip, but we all know that things don't always go to plan. You've got to be willing to regroup and make adjustments, whether that involves rescheduling, reprioritizing, or redefining your goals. Again, this is where having those contingency plans can be useful so that you don't lose sight of the bigger picture in those stressful moments, and so you can more quickly move on to plan B, or even plans C and D. Fourth, remove distractions. This tip is pretty straightforward. When you're engaged in a learning activity, whether it's studying your notes or completing an assignment, either find a work location with minimal distractions or modify your working environment to make it easier to focus. Are you distracted by your phone? Turn it off. Are you getting interrupted by emails? Log out or turn off your internet connection. Are the kids distracting you? Work in another room. Give them something to do or plan to work when they're asleep. And don't fall victim to the myth of multitasking. As much as possible, focus on one task at a time, even if that means working in short segments. 15 minutes of real, undivided attention will be more beneficial than 30 minutes of multitasking. No one lives in a distraction-free world, but small modifications can make a big difference. Do the best you can. Which brings me to my fifth and final tip for staying on track. Reward yourself along the way. Don't rely on others to reward you, which may never happen. And don't wait until the very end to reward your accomplishments. Instead, make a deliberate plan for how you will reward your own progress and efforts towards your learning goals. It might be as simple as allowing yourself to take a break after you've worked for a certain period of time. Yes, breaks are important. Or it could be something more tangible, like buying yourself a treat every time you check off an item from your to-do list. And maybe those rewards increase in increments as you make progress, perhaps ending with a weekend retreat or some indulgent purchase once you reach your long-term goal. On the flip side, you can also threaten yourself with potential punishments. For instance, maybe you can't watch Netflix if you haven't completed your to-do list for today. There are even websites like stick.com, which will allow you to place monetary bets. If you accomplish your stated goal, you get your money back. But if you don't reach your goal, then they keep the money. Or even worse, the money goes towards some cause, charity, or politician that you don't actually support. Personally, I prefer to focus on positive reinforcement, but potential punishments work well for some. Another related strategy is what Catherine Milkman calls temptation bundling. Simply put, this involves pairing something you need to do with something you really want to do. In other words, temptation bundling is kind of like rewarding yourself while you are engaging in the task instead of waiting until afterwards. Here are a few examples. Only allowing yourself to have a special coffee drink while you are studying. Only exercising while listening to audio lectures. Or only allowing yourself to get a pedicure while you catch up on those important emails. In essence, doing what you need to do means that you also get to do what you want to do. And with temptation bundling, the hope is that eventually you'll look forward to engaging in the educational task because you'll associate it with something you already enjoy. At the end of the day, whether you reward yourself after or during the task, it's all about finding incentives to help you stay motivated and on track. Sometimes we need a little more than just the intrinsic reward of making progress. Allowing ourselves rewards along the way can help us stay positive and entice us to continue moving forward. After planning and doing, we come to the third and final phase of self-regulated learning, the reflection phase. And this is the phase that's probably most often skipped. When we're successful, we usually don't feel the need to go back and review our process and strategies. After all, we made it to our goal, right? Time to move on and on to the next. On the other hand, we don't often reflect on failures either because it's too emotionally draining and embarrassing. Better to shove that failed exam in the back of a folder than to actually face evidence of your incompetence. But if we really care about improving, it's worthwhile to take some time to effectively debrief. This means assessing your own performance on a task, considering others' feedback, such as comments provided by an instructor, figuring out what strategies worked and what didn't, and ultimately making plans for what you might do differently in the future. The more we engage in deliberate self-reflection, the more likely we are to identify mental and behavioral patterns, or even environmental triggers that could be holding us back, and thus the more likely we can develop interventions to avoid falling into those traps in the future. And aside from identifying problems, it's also worthwhile to identify any strategies that worked or helped so we know better where to start next time. We can save ourselves time, effort, and heartache if we make a point of trying to learn from our past experiences. In sum, engaging in self-regulated learning is akin to sitting in the director's chair for the film of your life. As a director, you may not have had complete control over writing the original script, but you do have control over how it plays out, including planning the scenes, developing a set that will support those scenes, and gathering the necessary actors. As director, you also monitor and control the filming stage, including monitoring the equipment to ensure everything is working properly, providing coaching and feedback to keep the actors on track, making impromptu decisions to adapt to unforeseen challenges, and implementing changes when better ideas emerge. Lastly, as director, you get to review the final product to ensure that it meets your standards, to identify areas for revision or improvement, and to inform the development of your next production. What I've tried to do over the past 10 lectures is to give you the tools to be an effective director, the strategies and skills that will enable you to take charge of your learning, make learning opportunities more meaningful, and ultimately enrich your life. Learning is a lifelong process, and I hope our time together has inspired you to seek new opportunities for personal growth. I wish you nothing but success as you chart your course for the future. Thanks for listening, and happy learning.